Hello everybody, it's Ed back from Metric Mogul with some more GTM and GA tips. Now in a previous video, which I will link to in this one, we did an implementation of enhanced e-commerce, or a very simple implementation, where we picked up some variables from the data layer and we tracked a product detail view. And in that video, I told you that you could also scrape information out of the page in order to send data to GA if you didn't have the data in a data layer. So that's what this tutorial is going to be about. So if you noticed in the previous example, we had quite a full data layer. We had ID, name, SKU, brand, and price, but we didn't have category. We didn't have product category available. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to scrape product category off the page. We see we've got it here on all of our product pages have this. There it is. Now, if you're in a situation like this and you have a way of accessing that through a CSS selector, then you're good to go. And how do you know? Well, if we have a look at the code here, we can see that this pasta bit, the bit of information we need, is within the span ID equals P category. So we can actually use that P category as a CSS selector to get access to that information. Now, obviously, if you don't have an ID, then you might have a class, or you might have some sort of attribute. And in fact, this is the only span tag on this whole page, so we could use that as well. So there's there's always a way to get at the information. The only downside of this method of doing things, of scraping information off the page, is that if the developers change the code, they change the HTML, they removed IDs, they change classes, your tracking is going to break. So use this as a fallback method, not as the method that you use by default. By default, all the information should be in the data layer. Use this as a backup. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to first set up a variable in GTM to pick up this category, and we know it has a span ID of P category. So I'm going to come over into the variables tab, I'm going to create a new variable, and I'm going to call that variable I'm going to call it s dot for scraping, or sc for scraping, because it's not really coming from the data layer. And what am I going to call that? I'm going to call it sc.product.category. There we go. And you need to choose DOM element here. So DOM element is coming from the DOM. We have an ID within the element, so I can use selection method ID, and I put in my ID right there. So let's give this a go. Save this. Okay, and just for the sake of it, I'm also going to create another one called sc.product.sku. Now, we're already getting SKU out of the data layer. We can already see it is in here. The SKU is already there. We're already picking that up. But just to prove that you can pick up other stuff, I'm going to pick it out of the data layer as well. Let's have a look. It's called PID. So a span with a class of PID, sorry, an ID of PID. So that's another DOM element with an ID of PID. Save that as well. So there we go. We now got SKU coming out of the data layer. See, this is why I like the naming convention, because DL, I know it comes from the data layer. Obviously, yes, you can look at this, but when you don't always have this column available to you. For example, if I'm in here, then I can't see that column. So having DL there, I know it's coming from the data layer, DL.productID, so on and so forth. So before we had the data layer SKU coming from the data, the SKU coming from the data layer for here, but I could just change that now for SC. Let's give this an edit. And before we also had unknown in here for the category, but now I've got it. So I'm going to do sc.product.category, because I can scrape that out of the data layer, out of the page. So we'll save that, and let's have a little preview of what's going on. So let's have a look. If my category is now correct, we've now got, if we have a look at the variables, you can see in here my SC product category is pasta, my SC product SKU is 001, and that is being injected correctly into this variable product detail view, which as a result, if you were watching the previous video, you will know is the thing that fires our our e-commerce data layer variable. So there we've got the category correctly set just by scraping it out of the DOM. Now, as I said earlier, this is not the method you should be using because the code changes and all of this will break. So you should be using a proper data layer. But if you don't have the option and you want to get something up and running quickly, you can use scraping.